Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. We got a bunch of updates for you coming out of the court system in the sort of battle against Doge, including a court ruling that the Trump administration is defying one of the previous court orders. So things are getting very interesting. We also have some new comments from Trump with regard to Gaza, saying that all hell will break loose and the ceasefire deal will be over if Hamas doesn't comply with what he wants. So we'll break all of that down for you. Also have a number of developments coming out of the AI world. The biggest one of which, though, is that Elon Musk has put in kind of, I guess, a trolley bid to buy OpenAI out from under Sam Altman. The details are a little complicated, but it is an interesting development.
It's an important story.
It is a very...
for the future of AI.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely important story for the future of AI. We also want to take a look at, so Google... Wasn't their original motto like, don't be evil?
Yes.
Wasn't that
right.
Google?
But they took that away many years
That's been gone for a while now.
Right.
But they had a list of AI principles, one of which was like, we're not going to use AI to murder people. That one has been taken down.
To be fair, it's been fake forever. They have always lied about that. They used to help the Chinese weapons system program back in 2017. So now they've just decided to say we're actually going to help
coming out of the
all
closet with that one.
Anyway,
yeah. So we'll update you there as well. Interesting story coming out of China. That major automaker from China, BYD, is now out with a fully self-driving electric vehicle for less than $10,000. Mm-hmm. We'll show you what the car looks like. Also, some of the other vehicles that they put out. I mean, they have become quite a juggernaut in the entire automobile space. When you think about just not that long ago, you would have sort of scoffed at the idea of a Chinese car. Mm-hmm. And now they are a major, major global player. We're going to try to get to the Stephen A. segment that we tried to do yesterday, but then Saagar and I talked too much, as per usual. He is floating around for president. Kind of interesting. At least he's charismatic, so we'll take a look at some of his positions. And then Sohrab Ahmari is going to stop by. He is talking about a sort of a warning for MAGA. It's a little bit similar to the topic I broached yesterday, but he's coming from the right, saying basically like, you're trading your ideology for a really bad deal. And, you know, you're falling prey to this sort of like culture war division and accepting that over some of the more substantive changes that were supposed to be at the heart originally of the MAGA movement. So really interested to hear from him.
Yeah,
He's always a thoughtful guy.
Sohrab is a very smart dude. And I encourage people to sign up for his newsletter and others. We're going to have that in the description of that video.
Yeah, Sohrab and Emily are doing a newsletter together. They're both over at Unheard now. Yeah. So excited for both of them.
He's a very thoughtful dude, and he's always an interesting person to talk to. So why don't we before we get to that, thank you to everybody who's been subscribing to the show. We really appreciate you. BreakingPoints.com if you can. But why don't we go off with the courts?
Yeah, so Trump was asked recently about whether or not he should abide by court orders and his reaction to some of the court decisions that were coming down against him and against Doge. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
You suffered a couple of court losses, Mr. President, and J.D. Vance said judges aren't allowed to control the executive power. What's your take on that?
Well, we're going to see what happens. We have a long way to go, and we're talking about fraud, waste, abuse, and when a president can't look for fraud and waste and abuse, we don't have a country anymore. So we're very disappointed with the judges that would make such a ruling, but we have a long way to go. We have to find all of the fraud that's going on. We have tremendous fraud, tremendous waste, and tremendous abuse, and theft, by the way. And the day you're not allowed to look for theft and fraud, etc., then we don't have much of a country. So no judge should frankly be allowed to make that kind of a decision.
No judge should be allowed to make that kind of decision. Those comments coming a couple days ago, but very important in light of the messaging coming from J.D. Vance and Elon and others suggesting that they could just potentially ignore court decisions that go against them that they don't like. Here is one of the latest developments, quite significant here in terms of the court battles. We could put this up on the screen. So a judge has ruled that they are in defiance right now. The Trump administration is in defiance of one of the previous court orders telling them to unfreeze federal funding. So a judge directs Trump administration to comply with order on frozen funds. That judge ordered them to restore federal funding they had tried to freeze, saying the White House was not fully complying with an earlier ruling against it. After the judge issued that decision, the states asked him to issue a follow-up order enforcing the earlier restraining order, saying the states continue to be denied access to federal funds. The states said in a court filing, still frozen funds included about $7 billion in grant money for solar panels, $5 billion that supports greenhouse gas reduction measures. In a court filing Sunday, Justice Department lawyers said the administration had made good faith, diligent efforts to comply. They said the funds at issue were frozen because of a Trump executive order signed hours after he was sworn in that paused tens of billions of dollars in federal climate spending. Okay, so what seems to be going on here is this one goes back to, you guys will remember all the chaos around like the executive order that's issued or it actually wasn't an executive order. It was a memo that was issued by the OMB saying we have to freeze all federal grant spending. And there was a caveat in there that said nothing that goes to individuals. Okay, but that means Medicaid would be frozen. That means that Head Start is frozen. That means Meals on Wheels is frozen. That means all sorts of things across, society that are important to people would be frozen. There was an almost immediate injunction issued against that, and the administration also tried to walk it back, rescinding that order, but saying you still have to comply and make sure that none of these federal grant funds are going to programs that violate the president's other executive orders with regard to DEI or quote-unquote Green New Deal and those sorts of things. So right now, there's sort of a scattershot approach where certain things, including a bunch of funds that are supposed to go to farmers as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, including just some random things across society. So like I think rural health clinics in some areas have continued to see their funds frozen. There have been hot meal programs that continue to see their funds frozen, just sort of like a scattershot of programs across society that have not seen those funds released. And so now this judge is coming in and saying you have to, even the things that you were saying are under the Inflation Reduction Act and it's subject to these other executive orders, whatever. No, my order applies to everything. And it's not an excuse that you're trying your best. You need to do what you need to do to make sure that all of these funds are unfrozen.
Yeah, it gets to the heart of the executive authority and to the court challenges that they're trying to invite there to the Supreme Court around the executive's ability to determine which is under their own scrutiny and which is not. I'm looking here just late last night, the Trump administration filed a reply. I sent it to our group in support of their request to vacate their injunction, and they are claiming a constitutional violation. They say, quote, a court order commanding that a segment of an executive agency be cordoned off from properly named political appointees while giving access to select civil servants. The government is aware of no example of a court order ever trying to micromanage an agency in this way.
Is this about the Treasury one?
This is about Treasury, but it gets to also in response to apparently is a USAID and says this court should not be the first. The existing TRO cannot stand. So this gets to what you're talking about. Not just in terms of the farmers and the IRA, but to the overarching theme that they're trying to, as I understand, I talked to a lawyer friend of mine yesterday, is that they're trying to get one of these cases up to the Supreme Court to get like an answer for judicial review on their ability, because it actually gets previously back to the repeal of the Chevron doctrine around the administrative state and the bureaucracy's ability to make rule changes. It's actually an interesting case because, again, as they were explaining it to me, was that they might have actually been better off if they had more of the administrative review and rule process that they had previously under Chevron as opposed to now, where it's much more about the letter of the law that's coming out of Congress. I genuinely have no idea how they'll rule, because what we talked about yesterday with the CFPB is, remember Clarence Thomas writing for the majority that the CFPB is not unconstitutional because it was created by Congress and it has that funding mechanism set up by the Fed. They may, in fact, actually defer to Congress's ability and shut down all of this executive review that the Trump administration is claiming right now.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. And I mean, the other big development here is right now, while this judge is saying you are in open defiance of a court order, there's still a story around like, oh, we're trying to figure it out in good faith and we interpret it different. And, it's hard to, the federal government's not just a switch you can flick on and off. And so we fully intend for rural health clinics to get their funding, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing our best. With this order, you're starting to move closer to things coming to a head, where if they say continue to not release funds to farmers who signed contracts with the federal government, to not release those funds to various clinics and things that have been affected across the country, there's no longer a story about how this is just like a good faith misreading of the ruling. Then it becomes brazen defiance of a lawfully issued order from the judiciary. And that's when you get into, the things that JD Vance has been saying, the things that Elon Musk has been saying, the things now that Trump has been saying, the things that frankly were floated even in Project 2025 and are of course part of the Curtis Yarvin butterfly revolution plan of when the courts stand in your way, you just ignore them and just do what you want to do. And so what I found significant about this ruling is it seems to be inching us closer to that place where there will be a decision point to see whether or not the Trump administration is actually going to comply when the courts say you can't do that. So we may be finding that out very soon. Let me go ahead and put this next update on the screen too, because this is relevant as well. USAID employees are also complaining that the administration is not complying with the previous order saying that you can't dismantle this agency. So that was, a temporary injunction that was also issued that says, we're evaluating this case, and in the meantime, you can't just destroy this agency. The court process has to play out. And, they present as evidence here, first of all, thousands of USAID employees have been furloughed and sent home. They also point out things like they went and took down the USAID sign from the building and brought up statements, I believe, from Trump and Elon and others that are like, USAID is dead, it's being fed into the wood chipper, et cetera, et cetera. So they are also claiming in this suit that the administration is not complying with that order. So another place where things could be kind of coming to a head in terms of this battle between the Trump administration, executive branch, Elon Musk, Doge, et cetera, and the judiciary, which is effectively the only real obstacle in their path at this point.
Yeah, that's right. What I'm actually interested in is what we're about to get to with the farmers, because this is one of those areas where this could be the first political flashpoint. We've talked previously, and I know many people are very concerned about USAID and others, but we've debated it here, I think, many times. A lot of that is about process arguments and how it could major impact for millions in the future. But the farmers case that I was reading about, and you're beginning to see some organic pushback on, is one that I'm very curious to see how that will affect Trump's support. And not only that, but invite some pushback from inside of the Senate. This was what happened with the tariff program that was on soybeans and other agricultural products last time around, where people like Chuck Grassley and others, Tom Cotton, and a few other very agricultural states really were dissenting from some of the tariff program, or at least asking for tariff-related assistance. So I actually think that this one that we're about to get to with the USDA funding, the IRA and farming contracts, could be the first sign of some actual intra-GOP conflict around the issue. And, look, everybody likes in principle to say, oh, well, the government's going to cut spending, and I'm talking with Republicans in particular, but it's like, well, when it's your own funding, it's a different story.
Yeah, well, USAID runs up against that as well, because there's, hundreds of millions of they buy a lot of food from farmers. The USAID, buys a lot of food from American farmers, ships it around the world to places that are, having hunger and food insecurity, famine, et cetera. And so that is also an issue that perhaps, may come to a head as well. But let's put A4 up on the screen to what Saagar is referencing here. So you've got farmers who are now reporting missing millions of dollars in funding that they were promised by the USDA. This was money that was brought about by the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course passed through Congress in a bipartisan fashion. So effectively, what happened here with a lot of these individuals is they signed contracts with the federal government to upgrade. They might do a solar installation to make their farms more energy efficient. There are various upgrades to their farms that they pledged to commit to. And the U.S. government was going to be on the hook for maybe half of the cost of that. And now, with the Trump administration saying, we're just not going to send that grant money out, a bunch of these farmers have already spent $80,000, $100,000 or more, expecting that they were going to be reimbursed. And if you know anything about the family farm world at this point, the margins are non-existent. I mean, these folks are really up against everything has to fall into place. The money has to come in when it's anticipated, or else they're screwed. I mean, or else they are really in danger of losing those farms. And so the Washington Post talked to a number of farmers who were facing this situation, a flower grower in Maryland they talked to. They also talked to this guy, Skylar Holden. He's a cattle farmer in eastern Missouri. He says he signed a $240,000 contract in December under the Environmental Quality Incentives Program to share costs on investments for his farm. With the funding, he erected new fencing, installed a well, had planned further improvements to his water system, spent $80K on materials and labor contracts that he expected were going to be partly paid back by the government. This month, the USDA representative told him the funding was paused because of Trump's executive order. He says, quote, "I asked her, is there any word on when they're going to be unfrozen? Is it going to be frozen indefinitely?" She did not have any answers for me. And again, this is funding that was appropriated by Congress, passed through bipartisan legislation, that the Trump administration is now claiming the right to just unilaterally say, we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's not
and there's also just like basic contract law at play here too. Like, just because you're the federal government doesn't mean that you're not also subject to contract law, where like, if you tell this farmer and you sign a contract saying we are going to reimburse you for part of this $80K, you are still legally obligated to that, even outside of the, the questions around congressional appropriations, power of the purse, et cetera. So again, seems like a pretty brazen violation of the law. And obviously, Skylar, I was about to show you a video in a minute after I get Saagar's response. Skylar voted for Trump. Like, most of these farmers voted for Trump and, thought that he would benefit them economically. And the reality so far for these individuals is quite different.
Well, let's play it, because that's what I'm curious to see if this actually takes off and becomes a thing. Let's take a listen.
I might lose my farm because of the government. I got in bed with the government. I was promoting getting in bed with the government because I thought it was a good idea. So, NRCS, conservation planning. So they had a program out there called the EQIP program. And what the EQIP program is it's cost sharing on stuff like fencing, different seedings, water lines, waters, wells, and stuff like that to better conserve farmland for agricultural use. And they called me today and said, hey, I know we have this signed contract. We're reneging on it. We're not going to pay out on it. What do you mean you're not going to pay out on it? So I've got all this stuff bought, and whenever I install it, you're not going to pay out. We had this contract. I made business decisions based on this contract. So now I have $80,000 out of my pocket that I didn't have to spend. So the $80,000 that we have is supposed to go to our farm loan in the fall. If we don't have that money, that's our hay money, that's our farm money, our farm payment money. If we don't have that money, we will lose this farm.
So amazing. There's another TikTok where he says, I voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. And it is amazing the way he frames it. The problem is the government, not the president you voted for, who is the explicit reason, who signed this executive order, and is the explicit reason that the funds are not going out.
That is what's the matter with Kansas in a nutshell, is you have a person here who voted for Trump. And I mean, maybe he couldn't have predicted that they were going to cut farming benefits or all of that, but what do you notice in his rhetoric and in his language? What is he saying? He's saying it's the government. The government is
Don't get in bed with the government.
Don't get in bed with the government. It's like, well, okay, you didn't think about that whenever. And look, it's hard. I don't like to dunk on regular people, but I mean, I guess he put it out there for himself. It is emblematic of a big problem that we have in this country, which is that when you are in the cult, like, you are unable to really either grapple with your own decisions or a total lack of wanting to save face whenever it's a problem that really is one, it's not on you per se, but the way that you're communicating it is just fundamentally different than if it would have been the Biden administration.
Of course.
And that's kind of what, we were talking yesterday about the rural health in Virginia, and I was looking at all these counties yesterday because I was curious for all the places that are most effective and where they voted for Trump. I'm talking like 85-15 margins in many of these places.
Virginia,
and I hate to say it, but as we all know, if we go down there, who are they going to blame? They'll be like, oh, it's those idiots up in Washington. I'm like, oh, well, what about Trump? No, he would never do that. And it's like, well, can you really change their mind? I mean, my framework is just so profoundly, I'm sad really, to see the country as it is right now, because I've seen a lot of this. We talked yesterday about the CFPB, and we're going to talk to that about Sora, but there is just so much like cultish behavior and thinking right now that I think it'll be like Obama, where, Obama presided over, what was it, the loss of the House and the Senate and the 1,000 state houses. I'm not predicting that necessarily for the GOP, but he personally did not ever incur a lot of those political consequences because people really felt they could trust him, even though, objectively you lose your house under Obama, your wages continue to go down. He ultimately is the man in charge. But for some reason, nobody was ever willing, to really blame him. Even to this day, he's got some 58% approval rating. And so Trump, these politicians, they just have a halo effect around them where people like that will never criticize them. But where is the guy from? Do we know? Do you know which
Missouri.
state? Okay, so Missouri. I guarantee you he'd be willing to call out, Josh Hawley or whatever, or the other senator from Missouri. Like that same halo effect doesn't exist for, mere mortal politicians. But Trump somehow is able to escape that. And I don't know if there's a world where people who are affected by like this and others will ever actually connect the dots, even if you explicitly tell them that you're like, no, this was cut by so-and-so. I could be wrong. I totally could be wrong. That it could be like, oh, it's Trump and Elon. I'd be like, okay, I'm voting for Kamala or whoever, Pete Buttigieg, the next time around. But I don't see any data to back that up.
Yeah. Well, certainly for probably 30% of the country, I think that's true. This has always been the Trump, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. Fucking true.
He's right.
Absolutely right about that. And I think Obama is the best analog on the Democrat side, but I actually think it goes further with Trump because with Obama, you at least had I don't know I'm sure you do remember, during the Tea Party era, Democrats were perfectly happy to criticize Obama,
absolutely.
throw him under the bus, and Pelosi, absolutely. They were totally willing to do that. And the grip that Trump has on the Republican Party now is really, it's quite unique. It is outside of anything I've seen, certainly in my lifetime. Maybe there's some examples going back through history, but certainly unique in terms of modern history. And yeah, you see it in real time, the way people, things that they, if it was Biden, they would be, just even if you just think about the inauguration image of Trump with the richest people on the planet standing there behind him. Yeah. Like, if it was a Democrat, that would be a hair on fire kind of a moment. But because it's their guy and they're like, oh, I like these billionaires are saying the things I want to hear right now because they're using you, because they're playing you, then it's fine. On the Gaza stuff too, the level of cope with regard to Trump floating the U.S. occupying Gaza, finishing the ethnic cleansing or potentially genocide on behalf of Israel, getting our men and women entangled in yet another insane Middle Eastern war. And the level of spin and cope is just incredible. Like some of them outright buy oh, well, it'll be great for America. We'll get something out of it and it'll be beautiful waterfront prop. They actually buy that bullshit. Or the other cope is, well, this is just his opening negotiating position and I don't know why you take him too seriously. It's like, he's the president of the United States. He's a big boy. He's floated this quite he read from a prepared statement. It's not like he was just freewheeling here. He's now said it multiple times. I don't know why we wouldn't take him seriously, especially when, Kushner suggested something very similar earlier. And what makes you think that this is out of character for him whatsoever? So yes, with a certain core part of the base, they may never leave him no matter what. But that's 30% of the country. There are a lot of people who voted for him who were on the fence, who voted for Biden last time, who, don't love him, but thought he'd be better for them economically or whatever. Those are the ones that you could see shift away pretty quickly if things go south or if they see direct impacts, which they're likely to, direct impacts in their communities on things that they care about. I just saw this morning, I sent you this, Elon, who's changed his Twitter name to something weird, by the way.
It's Harry Balls.
Harry Balls. Yeah, this is the man that's running our country right now. That's awesome.
Right.
Anyway, posting about how there's more fraud in entitlements than anything that we've seen ever before. And we're supposed to believe that he's not going to go after Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Trump yesterday says the defense spending is going to go up. And meanwhile, we're supposed to be cheering like them canceling the Politico Pro subscriptions, like that's some real cost-saving, like cost-cutting measure. Like, give me a break.
This is the
just all
difficulty.
preposterous.
This is what I'm saying is, you know, in the media environment, and maybe people have noticed that I feel particularly black-pilled lately, but in the media environment that I swim in, this Politico thing, you would think it's the greatest scandal in American history. You genuinely would think that this is like an insane, and you know, it's funny. Obviously, I agree it's bad and in terms of government subsidizing these media companies, and that is a story in and of itself. But the blinders stop right there, right? And it doesn't get to anything bigger. And I really try to keep like a calm head. And look, even on the Social Security thing, I think he's probably correct in terms of Medicare fraud in particular, because the estimate I've seen is 50 billion. If anything, fraud is likely to be the biggest fraud in history, only because these are the biggest programs in history. Now, is he saying that to, you know, to the end of like cleaning it up, or is it something that's paired with a cutting entitlement? I think that we know, at least at where Elon is. Trump has said he doesn't want to cut that at all. But yeah, explaining the magnitude and difficulty of this is very different in this vibes information system where, again, I've tried to communicate this in terms of USAID. It's 0.7% of the federal budget, and yet people are saying that this is like the greatest American revolution. It's like, okay, so even if you cut half of USAID, that's 0.35% of the federal budget. Now, they're talking about auditing the Pentagon. I support it 100%. But again, you know, like you just said, they're talking about increasing defense spending. It's like, to what end? For what? Because the current system is completely screwed up. If you could spend 2/3 of the Defense Department, and if you redid our procurement systems, you could have more equipment and more lethal and a better military and spend way less money, because probably 1/3 of that entire budget is just outright total corruption and stealing from these defense contractors. But also, that's the issue, is that they don't necessarily want to do that. So it's like, now what?
Yeah.
What are we doing here?
Not to mention, if you're going to do that in a serious way, you're going to use Elon Musk, who is one of the Pentagon's top contractors. Like, who are we kidding? Who are we kidding about this being some sort of like free and fair? Yeah, Elon might cut the contracts to his competitors. You know, we're going to talk in AI.
It sucks too.
We're going to
his
talk
competitors genuinely are also criminals. So it's like,
sure.
There's no good,
I mean,
there's no good people.
But like, and then funnel that money to his buddies at Palantir, right?
Yeah,
As
maybe.
we're about to discuss later. I mean, Palantir's stock is through the roof. That's why, because everyone assumes Elon is going to go in there and funnel the money to his friends and partners. So that's the reality of what we're dealing with here.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.